Welcome to Epg Pathshala. Today we are going to discuss the module, the state of nature and the nature of the state in the social contract theories of Hobbes, Locke and Rousseau. This module is written by Pooja Roy of Rashmibai College, University of Delhi. I am Raghuram Raju from University of Hyderabad. One way to begin this module is to locate the context of social contract philosophers, and this can be done by recalling what went before them. Political philosophy before social contract philosophers largely used two important concepts in a particular relation, and they are social reality and political ideal. Plato and Aristotle discussed various theories that were available during that time, various political practices that were practiced during that time in their works, Plato's Republic, Aristotle's Politics. And then they found that there are some limitations, there are some defects, there are some serious points found wanting in these practices. So they rejected them and postulated an ideal, a political ideal. Republic is the political ideal that Plato postulated. Polis is the political ideal that Aristotle postulated. But Machiavelli comes and seems to suggest that postulation of a political ideal distracts one's attention from reading the real nature of the real. So he seems to have abandoned the ideals and the obsession with art, and said that the major job of political theory or political philosophy is to look not at what ought to be the case, but what is the nature of reality, social reality, what is the nature of is, or a fact, social fact. Now, this is a major turn in political theory, but what is common to all these three, Plato, Aristotle and Machiavelli, is that they have taken the social reality as a starting point in their texts for political theorizing. Now, this brings us to an important point. The important point is, if you accept social reality, then you have to accept inequality, because social reality is full of inequalities. So that's the reason why contract philosophers, particularly somebody like Rousseau, says that Aristotle is right when he says that inequality is natural, but he took the effect for a cause. In other words, the society that is in front of us is not what it was. It is not the cause. It is an effect. And what was a cause? The cause that preceded this effect is in fact, this is the third term that comes into political theory, namely natural. There is a natural world which is a state of equality, where there is individualism, freedom, liberty, and other kinds of things. And this state was converted by several philosophers and made them to be presented as a real state of inequality. So they hid the state of equality, which was an original state, and projected the concocted or constructed society and made us believe that inequality is indeed natural. So that is why this is the context where there arises a need to postulate a third category in addition to social reality and political ideal, that is in the form of nature. So there was this nature and the state of nature and man in the state of nature. There are three important aspects, and the ideas such as rights, liberty, freedom, equality are attributed to this man in the state of nature. So the nature is a larger thematic which houses individual, and these political concepts like equality, rationality, liberty, freedom are the attributes of this man in the state of nature. That is the radicalness of the contract philosophers. So if you accept social reality, then it tantamounts to accepting inequality. So they said that one way to abandon inequality is to postulate a state behind the social reality, which is the state of nature. Now this is the most important thing that governs the discontinuity between social reality, the empirical social reality, and the natural state. Now let us now look at how three of these contract philosophers comes up with different natures, different attributes of this man in the state of nature. You have Hobbes, who says that man in the state of nature is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. So this state of nature for Hobbes, or in Hobbes, is characterized as a state with continual fear and danger of violent death. He attributes the causes for disorder to the absence of social rules. So the reason for this man to leave this state are obvious. What is it? That if each human being who is nasty is capable of killing the other, also knows that other person is also equally capable of killing yourself. So now if it goes on like this, the consequences of this state is the state of war and inevitability of community death. All people will die. So the consequences of constant war and the inevitability of death is what makes these individuals, dictated by the enlightened selfishness, to think of surrendering this individualism of the state of nature and enter into a civil society through a contract. So this is the reason why the contract philosopher like Hobbes says that you have to leave the state of nature. The reason why you have to leave the state of nature are not external reasons, they are internal reasons. What is an internal reason? The internal reason of equal fear of destroying each other. This is what makes them to completely surrender. If you are completely violent, then the only way to ensure the consequences of this complete violence is to completely surrender. This is not, as I said, external reason driven, but it is internal reason of preserving life and avoiding death. That is what makes these people in the state of nature to leave this state and enter into a contract so that their life is secured. So the commonwealth that is contracted by the contract philosophers is absolutely powerful. It is monarchical in its nature. The man in the state of nature necessitated this powerful commonwealth. The absolutism of the commonwealth is justified as only the powerful political organization can restore and bring peace. As pointed out by Ebenstein, Hobbes is vehemently opposed to the division of the powers or mixed government, and to quote, to keep the authority of the state strong, Hobbes advises sovereignty not to allow the growth of groups and institutions that intervene between state and the individual. So, there is no agency that Hobbes allows between individuals and the state. State is absolute and individuals have to obey completely the orders of the state. This is a picture that you have in Hobbes. Now, one might ask the question, why is Hobbes a modern philosopher if he surrendered individuality to a collective? The reason why he is indeed a modern philosopher of an enlightenment is because it is the individual who surrenders his individuality to a commonwealth. So, the commonwealth, though subsumes and completely eats away all the individualism, is still authored by individualism. That is the point that makes Hobbes individualist par excellence. Okay, that's the picture that you have in Hobbes's contract. If you come to John Locke, the second important contract philosopher, unlike Hobbes, Locke did concede a marginal society in the state of nature. There is indeed family in a very in a very light manner. There is private property in the state of nature. Unlike Hobbes, Lockean man is not brutish. He is good and rational. Okay, the Lockean man, says Locke, I quote, is within the bonds of law of nature, without depending upon the will of any other man. It is a state of equality, a state of liberty, not a state of license, though man in the state have an uncontrollable liberty to dispose of his person or possessions, yet he has not liberty to destroy himself or so much as any creature in his possession, but where some noble use than its bare preservation calls for it, unquote. So, the reason for the man in the state of nature in Locke are the following. Locke says that though the state is a desirable state, however, there are two reasons why you need to leave the state. One, in the state of nature, there is arbitrary use of power. Okay, anybody can punish anybody who does something wrong. Okay, that needs to be corrected. So, you need a powerful judge to rationally adjudicate and eliminate biases in giving judgments of wrongdoing. So, there are these two reasons. The third reason why Locke thinks that you have to leave the state of nature is you need a strong state to protect your private property, because as you know that property is very, very important in Locke. In fact, it is a property that gives identity to human existence. Let us look in his own words what he says. Let me quote Locke. He says, "It is unreasonable for men to be judges in their own cases, that self-love will make men partial to themselves and their friends, and on the other side, that ill nature, passion and revenge will carry them too far in punishing others. Hence, nothing but confusion and disorder will follow, and that therefore God hath certainly appointed government to restrain the partiality and violence of men," unquote. He further observes, and I quote again, "To avoid the state of war is one great reason of men's putting themselves into society and quitting the state of nature. So, where there is an authority, a power on earth from which relief can be had by appeal, there the continuation of the state of war is excluded and the controversy is decided by that power," unquote. Okay, so now we have completed the discussion on Hobbes and Locke. Now let us look at the third contract philosopher, man in the state of nature in Rousseau is or interpreted by various people. Let us look at two interpretations. There are those who argued that man in the state of nature is good and noble. This is a person called Corvette who gives the interpretation. But the problem with this interpretation is that if man in the state of nature is good, there is a serious problem. What is the serious problem? That good is product of society. Okay? You have good and bad in society. So, if man in the state of nature is good and noble, you already presuppose society, and the state of nature is pre-societal or non-societal. So, that ran into serious trouble. And there are others who argued that man in the state of nature is not good and noble, but is neither moral nor immoral. It is a state of morality. Okay? Because somebody like Durkheim, who argues for the man being amoral, says, and I quote, men in this state had no kind of moral tie between them and no known duties. They could neither be good nor bad, had neither vices nor virtues. Morality could come into being only with society. Rousseau frequently refers to this state as a state of innocence, unquote. So, you have this, but the problem with this interpretation is there are many people who argued that if man in the state of nature is amoral, it smacks of theology, Christian theology, because it is similar to the, or it is nearer to the idea of Adam and Eve before fall. Adam and Eve before fall, before they ate the forbidden fruit, are neither moral nor immoral. So, that is the reason why many people criticize this version. Now, let us look at how, for instance, this desirable state of nature is made to be given up, and Rousseau makes these people to enter into contract. Now, if you look at the state of nature in Rousseau, it is not a state like Hobbesian state of nature, where you have to leave, people have to leave that state to avoid death. In contrast, Rousseau's state of nature is desirable. So, one might ask this question, why should I leave this state? Why can't I remain in this state? Now, Rousseau says, yes, you don't have to leave the state of nature. Let me quote this passage where he comes to say something very near to this. To quote, to renounce liberty is to renounce being a man, to surrender the rights of humanity and even its duties. For him who renounces everything, no indemnity is possible. Such a renunciation is incompatible with man's nature. To remove all liberty from his will is to remove all morality from his acts. So, that is the biggest problem I got. So, that is the reason why he says that there is no need to renounce your natural liberty that you enjoy in the state of nature. But then, after a while, in the same book, he goes on to make a different point, and let us see how he makes this point. He says, I quote, man has reached a point at which the obstacles in the way of their preservation in the state of nature show their power of resistance to be greater than the resources at the disposal of each individual for his maintenance to that state. That primitive condition can then subsist no longer, and the human race would perish unless it changes its manner of existence. Unquote. In other words, you see now that he, in this second stage, brings an external agency, an external reason, namely that though the state of nature is desirable, but we have reached a stage where it is no more possible to retain that state. We have to move on. Okay. That's the reason why you have to leave the state of nature and enter into the contract. Now, he comes up with a third argument where he says that, almost comforting the person to leave the state of nature and enter into civil society, he says that what you lose in the state of nature is a natural liberty, and what you are going to gain in civil society is civil liberty. To quote him, The passage from the state of nature to the civil society produces remarkable change in man by substituting justice for instincts in his conduct and giving his actions the morality that they had formerly lacked. Although in this state he deprives himself of some advantages which he got from nature, he gains in return others so great. His faculties are so stimulated and developed, his ideas so extended, his feelings so ennobled, and his whole soul so uplifted, that did not the abuses of this new condition often degrade him below that which he left, he would be bound to bless continuously the happy moment which took him from it forever. An instant of a stupid and unimaginative animal made him an intelligent being and a man, unquote. To quote again, he says that, let us draw up the whole account in terms easily commensurable. What a man loses by the social contract is his natural liberty and an unlimited right to everything he tries to get and succeed in getting. What he gains is civil liberty and the proprietorship of all he possesses. If we are to avoid mistake in weighing one against the other, we must clearly distinguish natural liberty, which is bounded only by the strength of the individual, from civil liberty, which is limited by the general will, and possession, which is merely the effect of force or the right of the first occupier, from property, which can be founded only on a positive title, unquote. The third reason is an internal one, as it comes within the individual and is not dictated by the sociological determination that was there in the second argument. Okay, so since Rousseau's man in the state of nature is good, the form of sovereignty that is ruled by general will is also good. He says that there is a commensurability between the individual and the society into which he enters. To quote him, he says about the general will, of itself the people wills always the good, but of itself it by no means always sees it. The general will is always in the right, but the judgment which guides it is not always enlightened. It might be got to see objects as they are, and sometimes as they ought to appear to it, unquote. So in addition, everyone has to follow the general will, and that's the reason why he says that there is a reason why you follow the general will, you ought to follow general will, is there is a continuity between individual will and general will is constructed by the individual's welfare. To summarize, one way to look at the radicalness of social contract philosophers is to recall what was going on earlier to them. As I said, that what existed in political theory preceding social contract philosopher is that there were these two terms which comprised the corpus of social philosophy or political theory, and they are social reality and political ideal, and that gets covered in Plato, Aristotle, and Machiavelli. Contract philosophers came and saw that the social reality which is in front of us is not the beginning of society, it is in fact an effect of a larger cause, and there was a incommensurability or discontinuity between what was the state and what is the state today. The state of affairs once upon a time was in the natural state. The state was state of equality, and that state of equality was constructed in an undesirable way to being presented as a state where there is inequality. So they said that we must postulate a third category called nature, and the nature is a state of equality. So the nature is the container that inhabits the individual, an autonomous individual, to whom things like rationality, freedom, liberty are attributed. Now, three contract philosophers gave three different versions of the man in the state of nature. For Hobbes, man in the state of nature is bad, nasty, selfish. For Locke, he is good and rational. For Rousseau, he is good and noble. Now, the internal reasons of consequences of meeting death if selfishness continues made Locke to postulate a sovereign where individual completely surrenders his liberty and enters into a monarchical order. For Locke, the reason why man in the state of nature has to leave that state is to avoid arbitrary use of power and protect private property. And for Rousseau, the reason why they have to leave the state of nature are three. One, they did not leave the state of nature. Two, they have to leave because it is no more possible to maintain that state of order. And three, that what they are going to gain is more than what they are going to lose. So that is the reason why they all came up with this different packages for entering into the contract. There are several people who argued that if the main purpose of modernity, and Hobbes, Rousseau and Locke are modern philosophers, is for individualism, we find that this individualism is completely surrendered by these individualists, which they find is very paradoxical. So that's why they said that there are many people who try to point out two or three important mistakes or criticisms on contract philosophers. One, they identified that the state of nature is not real. It is a postulation. It is as theologically concept as the concept of God was in theology. Okay. Two, there are other people who said that the postulation of the commonwealth or the general will and complete surrendering of individual is in fact the foundations for the later totalitarian regimes. Notwithstanding this criticism, what is important is that they propose something very radical, even though it is not real. What is important also to remember is that even in surrendering the individualism, the surrender is done by the individual. That point needs to be kept in mind.